The UWITV now presents a distinguished guest lecture on the future of medical research and innovation.
I'm going to talk a bit about the future of medical research and innovation and how paradigms are shifting. It's my belief that the next 10 years are going to see some of the biggest changes in medicine that we will see at any time in history. I might be wrong, but I think there are a number of events aligning, and there are a number of developments occurring which make me think that we're going to see an enormous change potentially. And part of this is going to be driven by what happens in our academic centres, and part of it's going to be driven by what happens outside in the world of business. Our Faculty of Medicine at UBC is a distributed medical school. It's distributed across the entire province of British Columbia. I'll show a little map of this later on. This is part of our purview within British Columbia. This is the Okanagan Valley, and those are vineyards, believe it or not, growing up in northern Canada and making very nice wine. And so it's my pleasure to visit our campus up there from time to time because, as you can see, there's a lot to be enjoyed. Let's start with some of what I believe are the key trends right now. A sampling of what is happening. Firstly, what we call the patent cliff. So we've seen all of the big blockbuster antihypertensive drugs, the drugs in my specialty, Nexium, esomeprazole, which treats reflux esophagitis, Lipitor, the lipid-lowering agent. These are all coming to the end of their patents, or have come to the end of their patents. And that means there are generic drugs available for these indications. It also means that the pharmaceutical industry is coming to the end of one particular era. It's coming potentially to the end of what they call the blockbuster era. So the big drugs for hypertension, for lipid lowering, for gastrointestinal conditions, they are here. A lot of them are well tolerated. With the end of the big pharma's monopoly on this, then the generic companies are producing these drugs at a cheaper rate, and we can think about how we improve healthcare more effectively with cheaper drugs. But for the pharmaceutical industry, this represents a bit of a problem, because the major indications are drying up, and the pharmaceutical industry has to look at developing drugs for more niche indications, or for subsets of major indications in a way that they did not think before. And that is a real opportunity for the academic medicine world, because we are the people that understand what the niche indications are. It's only recently that we've begun to think about successful aging, that is aging that is unencumbered by disease, aging that is healthy aging, effectively. And there's a group of people here who are aging. This is the Rolling Stones performing into their 70s right now. Not exactly the examples that you would use in terms of a healthy lifestyle, but Gillian Tett, who writes in the Financial Times, wrote that if pensioners can now dance so wildly on stage, might it be time to rethink the whole concept of retirement, and to some extent the concept of what aging actually means. So, you know, we have other people like Ryan Giggs, who's playing Premiership football at the age of 40. Nobody was surprised to see that James Bond's boss was an 80-year-old female actress, Judi Dench. Nobody blinked at that. So the concept that not only can she be acting, but that she can be acting as the head of a spy service. And this chap, Fauja Singh, is running marathons at the age of 100. So, and lastly, this old guy here in the red shirt, you might recognize. This is the professors against the students game at Trinity College, and the professors beat the students. So, so aging is different now. We should be thinking about how people mature and live full and active lives for much longer periods than they used to. Another trend here is the concept of sustainability, because healthcare is expensive, and the paradigm that people always tend to invoke is that if you want excellent healthcare, you've got to spend more money. But if you look at this curve, which looks at life expectancy in the tall bars, and then the expenditure per capita on health across the wavy line, you can see that there's no direct correlation. And in fact, if you look at the big outlier there, the largest expenditure per capita on health is the United States. So how do we create the framework for delivery of healthcare that, in a sustainable way, that allows full return on economic investment? And so the next piece that I just want to, the next major trend I want to emphasize is the trend around big data and around data connectivity. So we're all connected to the net. We're connected here. I'm connected to that mobile phone that was causing trouble a minute ago. We're connected to our laptops. We have access to all the data on the planet at the drop of a hat, but we might not have access to the data that we need right here. And so the challenge is to align that connectivity with the collection of the correct data in the right place. And you can't see this terribly well, I'm afraid, but effectively the balls include discovery science, stratified or precision medicine, citizen-driven health, which I'll come to, public health, and then the last one, which I think is really the most important one, is the one which I've highlighted here as learning health systems. So if you have data, effective data within your health system, you can learn continually whether what you're doing is right or wrong, and you can modify the health system accordingly. And so that emphasizes the critical importance that we've been talking a bit about over the last couple of days of ensuring that data is available and it is available at sufficient quality within the health system to make decisions regarding how we treat. So those are the trends. And one more trend to come, and it relates to how we predict the future and what the future can bring. And effectively, there are a few different people who a long time back tried to predict the future. Woody Allen, in his movie Sleeper, somebody wakes up 100 years into the future and they tell him that they've now discovered that smoking is good. It's quite the other one, Future Shock, which spoke about the fact that people will have multiple careers within their life spans, and that's something we've certainly seen, but it was revolutionary in the 60s, and also that disposability will become a feature of modern life, and we've clearly seen that. And lastly, the movie which came out in the late 60s, 2001: A Space Odyssey, really put the concept of artificial intelligence on the table. That is a computer that is now thinking for itself and is now making decisions which are actually, in the movie, were quite malign, but science fiction produces that concept of artificial intelligence, and we're now at a place where we're starting to see this, and we're starting to become worried. People reading the papers over the last few weeks will have seen people like Stephen Hawking saying he's worried about artificial intelligence and malign artificial intelligence. So if we say where we are on a trajectory right now, and how this applies to medicine, you can look at the trajectory of the industrial revolutions. So without going through it in detail, revolution number one was steam power, James Watt and all of that, and the British Industrial Revolution, effectively. Revolution number 2 came about with the use of production lines and electrically powered production lines, and that created a change in the way that manufacturing took place. And revolution number 3, which came about at the start of the 70s, was when electronics and information technology were used to achieve further automation. So we see this everywhere in our lives right now, from our microwave oven to the sophisticated CT scanners and MRI scanners in our hospitals. But the 4th industrial revolution, which is now happening, is considered to be based on the interaction of cyber and physical systems. And what that means is that at this point, it is now possible to fuse the physical, biological, and digital worlds. So technically and feasibly, it's possible to use digital technology to influence the fate of an individual cell or an individual molecule. So that's a big challenge for medicine, not just from a research perspective, but from an ethical perspective and from all kinds of health economics perspectives as well. But it is now possible. So the outcomes of this revolution are supercomputing intelligent robots, self-driving cars, but now we can see that people can stimulate the brain in a particular spot, make an arm move, change the way in which the brain works. Or genetic editing, another example of how that can work. Or the concept of using digital health, using electronic monitoring of heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, distance, at a distance, resulting in triggers that might, technically it could trigger an electronic device, or it could trigger a warning to take a pill, or all kinds of things. So we're at a point now where this is actually real. So the last trend, which I'm going to kind of postulate, is this trend of disruptive innovation. We've just been talking about it recently, haven't we? This is the world where disruptive innovation is coming into play. But think about who said it first. Anybody got an idea? Who kind of came up with the idea of disruptive innovation first? No? Okay, well, I'll tell you. It was William Shakespeare. He used the phrase, that hurly-burly innovation. Can you imagine a better way of describing disruptive innovation in the context that we're talking about, which is medical scientists, engineers, physicists, business people knocking against each other and coming up with ideas that are different. He also said, there's nothing new under the sun. So he was pretty accurate in that prediction as well. So William Shakespeare. But one of the big disruptors, I think in a very positive way, was the development of Medline. We all use it, but Al Gore, who was vice president at the time, made that free around the world, changed the way all of us access research. All of us have the world at our fingertips for the first time in terms of how we did research. And of course, we've seen Uber, Airbnb, changing industries. The taxi industry, it's a big shock to the taxi industry. And we have to consider, are there big shocks for us in medicine? This is where I saw that this publication as a big shock. This is a publication from Stanford, which is called Dermatologist Level Classification of Skin Cancer with Deep Neural Networks, published in Nature this year. And this means that there are 5 authors to this paper. They took photographs, thousands of photographs of skin cancers and other skin rashes, and the computer was better at predicting histological skin cancer than the dermatologists. That's disruptive innovation. Any dermatologists in the audience? There we go. We have you know, your jobs are going to change when this comes into play, because we'll be looking at different ways of doing dermatology. It'll be good for dermatology, perhaps, but it'll be challenging. So, is this the beginning of a major paradigm shift? Can this apply to other areas of medicine? So, looking at that concept and looking at the idea that shifting the paradigm is the subject of this talk, I'm going to go through a number of areas in which the paradigm is shifting, I believe. And in this case, in terms of the disruption in the pharmaceutical industry, I believe that this is incredibly beneficial and a point of real opportunity for the academic world. So, the blockbusters we've already commented on. We're now seeing that better use of existing drugs through enhanced compliance and better selection is a real opportunity, using technology to know whether somebody has taken their drug, using technology to remind people to take their drugs. That's all possible now. We're using sensors and smartphones. Equally important is the fact that pharmaceutical industry is looking at niche indications. There's a drug for paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria called eculizumab, and that's a rare indication for a drug. The cost of that drug is $800,000 per annum. So the rare indication, hugely expensive drug. There is a real challenge for us all. But precision medicine is here, and that means that we can predict in a number of cases that a drug will work in patient X and not in patient Y, and therefore we will only prescribe that drug to patient X. And that a lot of the basis for that prediction is genetic, but I believe we'll see a lot more complexity emerging in that space. And most importantly, because if you take that drug eculizumab, which is an anti-complement agent used for paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, it was developed for something else. This is what kind of is quite annoying in some ways. It was developed for something else. It didn't work. It went into a trash can somewhere. And some hematologists looked at it and said, you know, if we treated paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria with an anti-complement 5 agent, maybe it would work. So they contacted the company and said, let's do that clinical trial, a clinician-led clinical trial. They did the clinical trial of the drug. It worked. The company then licensed it for paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. So people who understand the diseases that they're working with can make those calls and can think and can develop or identify drugs that may work. So innovation in the academic sector is critically important. Now, I was asked to talk a little bit about innovation, and I will speak about this particular process, which is sometimes hard and troubling for academics, and that is that you must protect your intellectual property. But if you make an invention, big or small, it's critically important that you're able to patent that invention. And I can see it's on the list of on the list of targets for the University of West Indies strategic plan. So you go from the idea to asking the question, is it a novel idea? So you might think it's a great idea, but someone might have thought of it before, in which case you cannot patent it. You may be able to publish it, but you can't patent it. Is there prior art? Is there something that in the literature that would make this discovery obvious? If so, you're in trouble as well. So you won't. You have to figure that out. Can it be defended? Do you have the capability to say, yes, this is my discovery, and I'm sticking by my guns as to this? Do you need additional information? If so, maybe you don't patent until you have it, or maybe you file a patent and look for the additional information. Can it be manufactured? If you have a great idea and you can't make it, it's not a great idea, but that might not be your question. That might be the person that you license it to's question. And who will pay for the patent long term? This is the really important one, because once you file a patent and it's been in existence a little while, you've got to file it in multiple countries, and then it becomes a very expensive proposition. So you have to know that you can find a way to pay for that. Either maybe a university will pay for it, maybe you will pay for it, or maybe a supporter or a backer or a partner will pay for it, but someone has to pay for it. Will it be disputed? You probably won't know until you do it. So it could be disputed internally or externally. And the crucial thing is that if a patent is disputed, it loses its value. Nobody wants a patent that is a subject of dispute. So, so if there were 2 or 3 of you filing this invention, make sure that you're good friends and make sure that you're all happy with your share of the invention. Because if not, and if you start fighting about it, the value of that patent goes to 0. But the other important part is that as academics, we like to be altruistic. We like to think we're working in pure research, and if we cross this line into patenting and development of intellectual property, we're going into a commercial or profit-oriented world. And that's a cultural shift for many of us. It's sometimes something that is difficult to cross. So when we think about this, we have Gordon Gekko from Wall Street saying greed is good. Greed is not good, but commercial elements do prevail. There is a divide between academic world and business. There's a divide between the pure profit, the profit motive, and the search for pure knowledge. And if you have investors, the investors will want a return on their investment, and that may be a pain in the neck to you as an academic and as a scientist, but they have shareholders, and their shareholders may actually be your pension fund or your parents' pension fund or somebody's pension fund, and you have to recognize that they do have to produce a return. So the vicious or virtuous cycle looks like this. You take the idea, you file the patent, and then you have to accumulate the money necessary to do further work and to internationalize your patent. And to do that, you have to go to vulture capitalists or venture capitalists, whatever they're called, quite often to get funding, and sometimes you find yourself in difficulty because they take a high price. But if you get past that phase and you work together, a lot of partnership with business people and academics and lawyers, all of them are important parts of this process. Lots of work, then you can eventually benefit from the rewards and find yourself sitting on the beach having made lots of money. That's what happens once in a while, and more often it's a bit more like this. So, but the crucial thing I would say is that if you have a great idea and you don't patent it, no company will exploit it. And so if you're thinking that I am being very, very pure and I will keep this as pure research and it's not going to be, and even if you've developed the pathway for a drug, you must patent it, because if you don't patent it, it won't get to the patient. The drug companies will have no interest. They are interested in the profit motive, and you have to recognize that. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of areas where we have done this sort of thing. I'm giving a few examples from my own experience in licensing and spin-outs. And this was the first piece of intellectual property I filed, which was to identify a protein in Helicobacter, it's down here, which appeared to be immunogenic. and we purified and cloned this protein. It turned out to be a protein called NAP-A, and we put it into these mice. And as you can see, when we put the NAP-A with a vaccine booster into the mice, it protected those mice from infection with Helicobacter pylori, the bug that causes ulcers. And that we thought was going to be a wonderful advance. And eventually it went into clinical trials with Novartis, and unfortunately it failed at phase 2. Now, failure is relative. To get to phase 2 is actually tough, and I'll just show you some of the things that happened, which made this a very long and drawn out process. So firstly, we did this work in combination with a company called Rican, and Rican went broke. So in the course of going broke, they thought they could sell the intellectual property on the open market, but they had signed a contract with the university that said the university owned it. So we retained the intellectual property, and it was licensed to Chiron. Chiron was the biggest biotech company in the world at the time. It made the hepatitis B vaccine, and Chiron unfortunately went broke. so they bought a factory to make 50% of the world's flu vaccine, and that factory was closed down on health and safety grounds. So they could not make flu vaccine that year. That's catastrophic. So Novartis bought them for a song, and Novartis took this up and left it on the shelf until the option ran out, and we said we want it back. And then, they said, no, it's okay, we want to take it forward. But by this time, many years had elapsed. So this is a cautionary tale, I would say, in terms of how these things work. And there are many such tales in the business. But at least they did take it forward, and at least we did achieve some progress. There's a second one here, which is a company we started in Trinity, which is a combination between biomedical engineers, physicists, and medicine, and that was a company called Dirac Fluidics, and we made this instrument which was able to dispense nanoliter quantities of fluid reliably and effectively. And this was used for DNA sequencing by the Broad Institute. They bought 16 machines from us, and they use this for all their sequencing because it reduced the costs of their reagents. So if they ran this machine for a month, they would save about $100,000, which was the cost of the machine. So they just kept on buying more and more machines. But eventually, we had to make a commercial decision, and we made the decision to merge our company with an American company called LabSite. And so this is the company that developed a way of dispensing liquids using ultrasound, and it's also a fantastic technology. You can see from here that this is going from strength to strength. It's becoming the technology of choice for checking drug sensitivity of tumor cells in real time. When you're dealing with how to make a decision with regard to treat cancer. And the other company then is a drug company, and that was Opsona, which was founded by myself, Luke O'Neill, and Kingston Mills, with a very smart biotech business person called Mark Heffernan, and we created an antibody-based molecule which targeted innate immunity. And this is currently in clinical trials in phase 2B, but it has an orphan indication for myelodysplasia, a rare condition. But this requires lots and lots of money, and we've had to raise a lot of money to keep things running so that we can run phase 2 studies. And we've developed different sources of income, EU orphan drug money, venture capital, pharma relationships and contracts. Pfizer provided us with funding, and various different venture funds, including Novartis Ventures and Genentech Ventures. The other example I'm going to show you now is an example from UBC, which is kind of it shows how innovation can work in primary care. And this is from the head of our Department of Family Medicine, Martin Dawes, and he looked at how many drug prescribing events are influenced by pharmacogenomic factors. So if you screen for the genes on the left and look for mutations or polymorphisms in those genes, what percentage of the population, what percentage of drug prescribing is affected by those? 96.8% of samples had one actionable genotype. The trouble is that when you're sitting there in general practice and you see this, you don't know what to do. You kind of look at it, what should I increase the dose? Should I reduce the dose? What the hell is that VKORC1 gene? I don't know. So what Martin and his team did was to take that approach and to make a data-driven information decision-making tool. So that makes the decision for you. It identifies the mutations and tells you, yes, you should not use this drug. No, you should increase the dose of that drug, etc. So just to show effectively, currently, you discuss the treatment options with the patients, you select the treatment, and unless there's an interaction alert, then you prescribe. With this solution, you make that adjustment right at the beginning. You take blood from the patient, you do the pharmacogenomics assays, and then the decision-making tool advises you as to what to do. So a few quick points about innovation, because I have a bit more to cover. And that is, big science and innovation are not the same. Little discoveries are just as important as big discoveries. I think the principal commented on the fact that failure is important, and failure is part of the learning process. Build as much value in-house. So before you go looking for money externally, build as much value. Make your patent as strong as you possibly can. And don't enter into any deals without a major corporate lawyer. We did that with our first company. Disaster. Absolute disaster. We had a fantastic contract, and the company withdrew, and it just wasn't, our contract, our legal stuff wasn't strong enough. Managers are just as important as scientists. We have to constantly remember that. And then there's a balance between the fact that you have to be cold about decision making. You love your research, you love your invention. If it's not going to work, you're going to have to say, stop. Don't spend more money on it. Let's work on something else. And commercial decision making is different. And as we saw with LabSite, everything may go differently, but it's great. Things can work in a different way. And lastly, there are opportunities in the big pharma space. And almost everyone gets it wrong. So even the ones that get it right. Now, the last little point on this is that it's good for your economy if people are inventing and protecting intellectual property. And secondly, it's always a good time to do this kind of thing in a recession, because the venture capital funds have more money, strangely enough. So they're not spending money as quickly in a recession. So if you have good ideas in a recession, you can get the money to do your work. So the second trend I'm going to talk about relatively quickly is the trend of precision medicine. Precision medicine is an emerging approach for disease treatment and prevention that takes into account individual variability in genes, environment, and lifestyle for each person. And you may say, what's new? Because don't we all do this in the course of clinical practice? But what is new about precision medicine is our reliance on data, the quality and the quantity, the scale of the individual variability that we have the scope to detect. If you do a genome sequence on an individual, huge variability, the potential complexity of the data that we analyze. Just look at tumor DNA now, and it is so incredibly complex. And to make it even more complex, maybe the concept that precision medicine can work across a population, so that genetic variability and environmental variability may be analyzable across a population. And I think that concept is the one that will change the paradigm for medicine. Now, in some ways, precision medicine began with this discovery, the Philadelphia chromosome, which involves a translocation between two molecules, BCL and ABL, and the discovery that which activates a tyrosine kinase enzyme here, and the discovery of a drug called imatinib or Gleevec. This translocation is found in chronic myeloid leukemia, and if you treat this with something that specifically targets that tyrosine kinase, you can produce complete shut-off of chronic myeloid leukemia. So that was a major, major change in medicine, the concept that we could selectively target one single translocation and change the course of treatment of leukemia. That came in, licensed in 2000, around the same time. Some other drugs like rituximab or infliximab came in, again, highly targeted agents. And so we then came to the concept that maybe instead of looking at a colorectal cancer or a melanoma or a lymphoma or a tumor that is characterized by its tissue site or its histology, we might be looking at characterizing tumors on the basis of their mutations. So you could take the same tumor and find that there is a JAK mutation, in which case you treat with a JAK inhibitor. You could take that tumor and find that there's a BRAF mutation and treat with a BRAF inhibitor. Or you might find that this tumor is a strong expressor of the molecules that switch off immunity, and in that case you would treat with a checkpoint inhibitor. And it doesn't matter that these are all 3 melanomas, for example, because they behave biologically in a different way, and therefore we have to treat them in a different way. Very, very important paradigm shift in medicine, and one that is really changing the way that we think. And there are lots of different ways in which an individual tumor's DNA may change. You may have translocations, inversions, somatic single nucleotide variations, or changes in gene expression, amplification. But right now, cancer treatment as the embodiment of precision medicine is moving into a space whereby we treat a cancer. We can start to think about treating a cancer based on its biology rather than its location or its tissue type. And we're taking this really aggressively in British Columbia, where we have the Precision Oncogenomics program. In British Columbia, we have the good fortune that every single cancer case in the province comes under the remit of the British Columbia Cancer Agency, which is responsible for cancer care across the province. So no matter where you are in British Columbia, your tumor is going to end up in the British Columbia Cancer Agency. And a lot of employees, about 30,000 new cases per annum of cancer. And if you end up in the British Columbia Cancer Agency and you have a tumor that is resistant or different or aggressive or metastatic, you may end up in the Precision Oncogenomics program, in which case you will have a whole genome sequence done on your tumor, entire genome sequence. You will have the expression of all of those genes analyzed within your tumor. And then there will be an informatics analysis which looks at this and says, something funny about this tumor, these pathways are activated, these pathways are not, maybe we need to target this or this or this. And that's reviewed by a multidisciplinary tumor board and then discussed with the patient. And, you know, we find very strange things. So here's a tumor which was a tumor of the tongue, in fact, which metastasized to the lung. And if you look across the first panel, you'll see that the tumor is seen here growing from left to right. And then at that point, the sequence was done, and the RET pathway was seen to be the dominant pathway. That's a particular oncogene, and that was targeted with a drug, I think sorafenib. And then the tumor regressed. You can see that on the third picture. It's shrunk. But a second tumor appeared, a resistant tumor, and that was sampled. And that tumor turned out to be responding to a mutation in ACT. And that mutation was treated with a drug called Sulindac, which is an anti-inflammatory drug. And again, you saw a shrinking of this. Didn't cure the patient, but you learn a lot about the biology from doing this. But we have seen cases where a tumor was found to be under the influence of the angiotensin receptor. Can you imagine that? The pathways downstream of angiotensin receptor, and patient treated with an antihypertensive drug and a response, or a patient treated with a sulfonylurea anti-diabetic drug based on the information from whole genome sequence analysis, and that patient had a complete response. So very, very strange things are happening. They're not happening in all patients. As you can see, if we take the 100 cases, 14 are showing clinical or radiological improvement. Does not seem to be a lot, but these are people who are failing other treatments. And effectively, what we see as the future is applying machine learning to this process so that we can make more effective decisions. And as you can see here from this slide, the cost of sequencing is falling. It's currently about $1,000 for a whole genome sequence. It is predicted to reach $100 at some point, and then all of our decisions are going to be different. Now, the third trend, which I'm going to just talk about, is how we go from this, and this is where the next decade, I think, is going to see the big change, because we're going to have to look at how we use health data across a population. And that health data may include genomics, it may include metabolomics, it will have to involve an understanding of how the environment and genetics influence disease. And then we begin to think about how we use that data to predict and prevent. But that requires a quantum shift in our analytical capabilities right now. And to do this, we need networks. We need groups of researchers who are collaborating and linked up. And it doesn't matter where they are, as long as they have the data linkage. This kind of illustrates some of the determinants. This is from our faculty's strategic plan, looking at the environment, social determinants, genetics, and cells and molecules in disease, and the levels of complexity that we're talking about. If you look at the time to the dawn of the universe, the number of bacteria in the colon, number of immunoglobulin gene rearrangements, when you start to do the numbers of the permutations, it's enormous. But to make this work, we have to look at how we develop networks. And an AHSN refers to an academic health science network, and that to me has three components. One is a central core knowledge environment, i.e. a university or an academic center in which you take into account not just medicine, but the biomedical professions, engineering, data science, pharmacology, geography, anthropology, etc. Critical to this is the ability to use data, to have data connectivity, to have data security, to have biobanking and ethics, and lastly, the potential to develop population-based delivery modalities. That means implementation science, that means an understanding of translating that information into actionable processes. And that's something that we need to, as a medical profession, need to spend a lot of time thinking about. Molecular stuff is going to be done in factories, essentially somewhere or other. That's the bit we're going to have to tackle. Okay, so coming to the end. Looking into the crystal ball, what does the future show? So I would say, one, precision health is going to evolve. We are going to be dealing with bigger and more complex data. We're going to need machine learning to allow us to interpret it, but it's coming. And when it comes, the algorithms for how we treat patients will change. Number two, our 14-year pathway. We're talking about how long it took for us to get our vaccine into a clinical trial. That's not going to work when you're identifying mutations in tumors that need treatment now. We know that biological agents can be made in the laboratory in a matter of weeks. There's going to be, I believe, a paradigm shift in the manufacturing capability required to take that into the clinic quickly. So somewhere along the line in the next decade, somebody's going to crack this, and we're going to have drugs on demand. This is probably the most provocative thing I'll say. And thirdly, advances in the molecular understanding of disease will require the development of new tools to realize therapeutic potential. That means that if we understand what's happening in a cell, we may need to engineer that cell. And our engineers are going to have different skills in order to make that happen. And fourthly, precision health is about human form and function and disease. So it's going to drive an emphasis on human science as distinct to mouse or rat science that translates to humans. We're going to be starting with the human and working backwards. And lastly, the power of the patient is going to be critically important. The patient will own their data, and they will be able to go to the right places to use their data. So, George Clooney isn't in this slide, but if we look at where Nespresso takes us, we have a menu of different coffees. You can make an espresso at the drop of a hat with this machine, with any different type of flavor or decaffeinated, whatever you want. There are people in our university who can make a customized biological agent, molecularly engineered in 2 weeks. And you can kind of look into a future in which you have a suite of biological agents that could be manufactured on demand in a simplified way. There's a lot to be done before that happens, but if anybody wants to put a bet, I'll bet that that's happening. I know GE are actually actively looking at how they manufacture in small quantities in small reactors. So this sort of thing, it's on the horizon. This is something that the power of the patient in crowdsourcing research, and this relates to work which is being done by my cousin, David Feigenbaum, who himself was the victim of a rare disease. And David, rather than sitting still, thought about how we could look at this disease differently. And in the last couple of years, his work and his research has transformed the area of Castleman's syndrome. He's been written about in the newspapers, so it's very public knowledge. But he's there have been bigger changes in Castleman's disease in the last couple of years than there had been in decades before that. And the critical thing that he sees as the power of the patient is that instead of that kind of rare disease framework in which you raise money from patients and loved ones for research, and then you invite the leading researchers to apply for this and they will spend it on their pet project. No. This approach says that you build a network first, that you connect people together, people who see those patients and people who understand those patients, and then you say, okay, we need the money to do the studies, and then you conduct those studies based on the partnerships. And this has really, really been a profound shift. And I think if you want to look at the literature on this subject, you will see that this is a transformative approach. We call it crowdsourcing research, bringing people together to make things happen. So lastly, I've given you some trends, I've given you some areas where I think the paradigm is shifted, but of course the future It doesn't always work out the way that we think. The only thing we know about the future is that it will be different. I believe that the importance of connectivity is going to increase over the next number of years, that the importance of the individual clinician in research is going to increase, because the individual clinician, in characterizing their patients and belonging to a network, has the capability to contribute substantially to the research that's being done. So I think at that point I'll bring the talk to an end, but I would like to say I believe that researchers here and researchers around the world have the ability to participate in that concept of bringing precision health to a population through excellence in clinical care and data connectivity. So just to say, this is the leaves have now probably all fallen in Vancouver, but thank you very much indeed.
UWITV has just presented a distinguished guest lecture on the future of medical science and innovation.